buddhiyo antara jenama upajanti. So the Sanskrit word buddhi basically means analytic intelligence, to be rational, be reasonable, know what you're doing, not to do things because of mere belief or irrational feelings or even blind faith. Prabhupada used to always say that religion without the philosophy is tends to be sentimentalism or even fanaticism, whereas philosophy without religion, as we can clearly see in the 2,500 years of Western philosophy, philosophy without religion simply becomes dry speculation. The history of academic proves that very clearly. So, what does it mean to practice Buddha yoga? Literally, it means a spiritual practice which is based on intelligence, rational intelligence, to understand things. So, if we apply that Buddha yoga to the fact that we happen to be on this planet right now, we call her, we have no idea what the real name to those who actually created it. But we're on this planet right now, and Prabhupada came, Krishna spirituality, and he very powerfully expressed his wish to transform this planet. That's why he came to America. That's why Prabhupada got on the boat. He could have gotten on the boat in any other course of goal. The reason Prabhupada came into this country is because still, despite President politics, is the leading country. So Prabhupada had a specific strategy. The fact that Prabhupada came to America and then went to New York City, because after all, we might understand the Butler, Pennsylvania, made this world headquarters with the 1.5 people who were members of this son. So Prabhupada coming to America, going to New York City, and everything else he did is an example of Buddha yoga in action, of using real intelligence, analytic intelligence, not merely faith, not even merely devotional sentiment, but actually using intelligence to serve Krishna. Prabhupada said, for example, he often said that the present world is headless, which is very true, and that the purpose of his mission was to put a head on the social body. Of course, that analogy where you compare the different Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra to a human anatomy, that is a very ancient metaphor that goes back, in fact, to the Great Veda, the oldest literature, practically in any language, certainly the oldest Sanskrit literature. In the 10th book of the Great Veda, we find a description of the Purusha, or the person with a capital P, or God. And the different social orders are mapped onto that gigantic cosmic body of Krishna. Now, the Bhagavatam, which is our main Shastra, actually gives a commentary on that 10th book of the Rig Veda. I know. And that's why if you look at the second canto of Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, the title of that chapter, of one of the chapters, the title Prabhupada gave is Purusha Sutta Concurrent. The Purusha Sutta is the name of that section of the Rig Veda. The prayer to the Purusha. So, Prabhupada is devising a strategy to save this planet. He did at least two things, obviously. Number one, he came to America. He could have gone to, I don't know, Bolivia. or Prabhupada could have gone to Thailand, but actually came to America because it's a leading country. And Prabhupada was operating on the notion that Krishna explained in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, whatever the greatest do, all people follow. Sanjat Brahman Guru Dev. Whatever evidence they accept, pramana, means evidence or proof. So, in fact, for common people, what the very prominent people do constitutes pramana for them, evidence, whether it's in frivolous things like fashion or behavior or philosophy or whatever. So Prabhupada thought that because America is a leading country, according to Krishna's statement, that Raja says that he would come to America. But that was not the end of it, because he come to America and do many things. So what did Prabhupada specifically want to do in this country? And it is something which still remains to be accomplished, I should say. That is, he wanted to attract very intelligent people. He wanted to do something very bold and something of extraordinary historical importance, and that is reconstitute a Brahmana order on this planet. Because as we know, there are still some people in India that call themselves Brahman, but they are, so to speak, not setting the world on fire. They're setting a lot of stoves on fire for cooking, but not the world. So therefore, if we understand Bhagavad Gita, if we understand Prabhupada, and we also, and we're trying to see how do we do that? This is really a socio-historical question. You have to know something about history. You have to know something about sociology if you're going to presume to figure out how do you actually do that? How do you recreate a learned varna, a learned social class that actually guide humanity so they don't fall prey to idiotic politicians and let's say priests who have very limited understanding of God? How do you actually do that? That requires buddhi. So look at Krishna's avatar. When Krishna comes to this world, he doesn't just show up. He actually takes birth in a particular family. And the family that Krishna takes birth in is a signal to what Krishna's MO is, his modus operandi, exactly how Krishna is going to proceed. Just like it says in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever Dharma is becoming very weak and adharma is becoming strong, then I come to this world, I manifest myself. And then Krishna said that to save, basically to save good people, and to eliminate those who are doing evil things in the world. And to establish real dharma. Some of the bhakti you gave me, I come in every day. So 5,000 years ago, Krishna came as a so-called kshatriya. He took birth from Vasudeva and Devaki, who occupied a particular social position as kshatriya. Now, that was a signal to what was going to happen. When Krishna comes with kshatriya, it means there's going to be hell to pay. You are a demon. And actually, Kamsa knew that. Kamsa knew that Krishna was his point of preaching and give him a flower and the back of the magazine. So that's why Kamsa, tried to do a preemptive strike on Krishna with it. And then, of course, Krishna first he spent some time in Vrindavan, and we all know the beautiful pastime Braja Leela. But then he left Vrindavan to take care of business. And this is the pattern in Krishna Leela. He first spent, early years just these very beautiful, loving relationships, family, friends, local boy next to it. And then Krishna leaves that intimate family setting and he takes care of business. Lord Chaitanya did the same thing. For example, the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela is the equivalent of Vrindavan Leela. It's very intimate. Krishna's associated with his friends, his family. Everybody knows him. He knows everybody. It's very personal and intimate. But then at a certain point, Lord Chaitanya takes the yard to go out and take care of business. But here's the relevant, crucial point I'm going to make. Whereas 5,000 years ago, Krishna came as a Kshatriya, and therefore, it's apart from Vrindavan Leela, which, as we know, is most exalted, in terms of Krishna's pastime to do Parichana and Sadhana, Sadhu Parichana, and Asura Vina. In order to do those things, he left Vrindavan and really manifested himself as the so-called Kshatriya. So when Lord Chaitanya came as a scholar, he came as a teacher. And when he left another week, Mayapur, he went out and began teaching the world, not giving. Just Prabhupada said in this age, there's so many asuras, you would basically have to kill everyone. So it just wasn't violent. So therefore, here in this age, we want to serve Krishna. I mean, what else are you going to do? I don't know, play croquet or something? Well, that's not bad and relaxed. But in terms of the purpose of our life, the purpose of our life is to serve Krishna. And so 5,000 years ago, the prominent devotees were people like the Pandavas and the Yadus. Because Krishna's birth, in particular Varna, is a signal to what the program is going to be. And the most prominent devotees who help Krishna in Varna Samstapa are of the same Varna. So there were certainly Brahmanas 5,000 years ago. But the Mahabharata, for example, is about the Pandavas and also about the Yadus, people taking birth in the same Varna as Krishna and helping him to engage in sadhu parichana and and dushrit vinaya. So in this age, the fact that Lord Chaitanya came as a teacher is a signal to us about what the program is to save the planet. What is the program to save the planet? And the program is by developing, to use a somewhat martial metaphor here, an army of learned teachers. That's how we save the planet. That's how we reestablish a Brahman order. Because without a Brahman order, society happens. So how do we do that? Actually, again, using movie yoga. How do you actually do that? Now, I'd like to quote two verses from the Bhagavad Gita, which in a sense explain how we do it. One of the verses, basically everyone knows, and that's chapter 4, text 34, translated in the BTT edition, learn the truth by approaching the Guru and submit, and then you learn the truth about Krishna, about other relevant topics. So But that verse begins in Sanskrit, Tadvidhi. Know that. Know that. By the way, just you may find this interesting, that English, historical linguistic, English is actually full of Sanskrit. I mean, basically, if you know linguistics, everywhere you look in English, you find Sanskrit. Take those simple words, type in E. We still have the word tut, just English having an E, which is that. Or vidhi, from the root V, vid, dhatu, the vid root, we have words like wit, intelligent, wit, video, vision, and Italian word, the Italian verb to see, vedere, and so on. So that's all sense. And it's come down to us today. Anyway, so everyone knows that verse, learn the truth by approaching the Guru, but everyone doesn't know, or what most even devotees have not really noticed, haven't come on their radar yet, is what is that? If you say it in English, that you should know. What is that? If someone tells you, you got to understand that before you say, what is that? Then you find out whether the person's crazy or actually. But anyway, so Krishna says, learn that. So what that is explained in the previous verse, logically. So what does Krishna say in the previous verse, which received hardly any attention? The previous verse says, Shreyam Dravyamaya Yagya Jnana Yagya Param Sarvam Karmakilam Partha Jnanadi Parismapyate. What that means is that much better, Shreyam, much better than simply serving me through rituals, Dravyamaya Yagya, is to serve me by knowledge, to learn and to teach others. It doesn't mean that we don't worship the deity, for example. There's a beautiful temple, and all of us need this. We all need to come to the temple and see Krishna, pure devotee, worship Krishna. But Prabhupada said that simply keeps us strong so we can do the real work. So if we think that the ritual, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, if we think that the ritual is an end in itself, my Christian conscious life is complete because I came and did this ceremony, we don't understand Bhagavad Gita. We should come to the temple, we should engage in the ceremony, but it's to fortify ourselves, to become spiritually strong so we can do the Yuga Dharma, which is teaching people about Krishna. As Prabhupada said, that those who are very intelligent in this age worship the Lord by the Yuga Dharma, which is Sankirtan. But as Prabhupada also explained, for example, in his little debate he had with the Indologist at the University of California in Berkeley, who I have managed to agitate in depth with the engagement discussion of Prabhupada. Prabhupada said that the word kirtan also means glorifying Krishna by philosophy. The Bhagavatam is the supreme kirtan, the Bhagavatam, and it's very sophisticated philosophical theology. The Bhagavad Gita is Krishna kirtan. So this movement is supposed to reconstitute, reestablish a powerful Brahmana Varna on this planet. And if we don't do that, this planet will simply, to use the old cliche, go to hell in a handbasket. That's what already doing. Sometimes the devotees complaining, why are the politicians so crazy? But that's not the real question. I mean, who in their right mind would think that these politicians are going to save the world? You have to be really mentally challenged to think that. The question is not, why aren't these foolish politicians saving the country or the world? The question is, where are the devotees? That's the relevant question. Where are the people who, by God's plan, are supposed to be saving the country? or the world. So, and it doesn't mean everyone has to be a scholar. I mean, that would be a pretty miserable world, wouldn't it? I mean, you wouldn't have anyone to talk to, it wouldn't drive you crazy. So, so the point is not that everyone has to be a technical scholar. The point is, though, that we should all be supporting that. We should have the best schools in the country. We should have a graduate level seminary. We should be training devotees who can go anywhere and reply to any argument and establish for intelligent people Krishna consciousness. We're supposed to be doing that. So are we doing that? No, we're not. Right. But we can do it now. So my appeal to you, and everywhere I go, until I sort of run out of town because I'm so controversial. But the is that that's what ISKCON desperately needs. The temple for beauty, as I said, we all need the temple. We all come to the temple to see Krishna, to be inspired. However, we take that inspiration and then we take it out to the world to change the world. That's why Krishna came to this world. That's why Lord Chaitanya came here. So there is a tremendous need. Nritya Kishore, who I wouldn't let any lecture pass without embarrassing her. But Nritya Kishore here, there she is in the red, sorry, is actually in charge as the director of one of the two most important gurukulas in North America, the one in Dallas, Texas. So just as Lord Chaitanya took sannyas, because in the culture of that time, people respected sannyasi. Sannyasi back then was sort of the equivalent of a professor, PhD. That's why Lord Chaitanya first went to Jagannath-puri, the ecstatic faith in the temple of Jagannath, and he was taken into the home of Sarvabhauma. And Sarvabhauma said, "Kid, what are you doing?" Because, you know, he was the age of, he was like the son. He said, like, "Why are you dancing and singing like that? You're sannyasi." I mean, you understand why he asked that question. Imagine, let's say that you were in perhaps, you know, a very prestigious university, like in this area, be Northwestern, or which are violin player graduated from music. Naperville, or the University of Chicago. There are two very, very prestigious universities in the Chicago area. So imagine if someone's going to one of those universities and they take a serious philosophy class, they walk into the class and sit down, the teacher comes out, starts singing and dancing. and the students are looking at each other like, okay, this is a sort of a novel way of teaching, like, what's the angle here? But no, he keeps singing and dancing, he's famous. So if you can put yourself in that situation, that's what Sarvabhauma was thinking. What the heck is going on? I mean, it's really beautiful sannyasi, golden, and all that, but who gave this guy sannyas? So then he wanted to instruct me about Vedanta. Of course, it turned out that Lord Chaitanya was the most brilliant scholar. So anyway, this is in Naperville. This is an important center, an important community of Prabhupada's mission in an important part of the world. And somehow or other, we all have to work together to fulfill Prabhupada's mission. I mean, there was, I can just be a little, what's the word? Straightforward here. Actually, Krishna says that's one of the qualities of Brahmins. So I'll use that as an excuse to justify myself. But in Christian chapter 18, when he's talking about the qualities of Brahman, one is Arjava. Arjava comes from the Sanskrit root or word virtue, which means straight, to that is straight. So Arjava means straightforwardness or rectitude, not just being straight about it, integrity. So Prabhupada himself, I mean, there's a sense in which, just to be honest with you, that Islam, as the Hare Krishna explosion of the 70s, it was wonderful, it's glorious, Krishna made it. But for Prabhupada, that was actually plan B. It wasn't plan A. And I'll explain that. If you look at all the letters Prabhupada wrote, before he came to America, he was still in India. He's writing letters, trying to, find some way into American society. And then we got to America in New York City. He's writing letters. Who was he writing letters to? And what was he saying in those letters? It's a very key point. If you're a historian, that's what you look at. Who was he writing letters to? And what was he saying in those letters? He was writing letters to leading persons, leading foundations like the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. He was writing letters because Trump was operating under the strategy of get out there and straight stuff. Whatever the best person does, the common people follow that. And then, as I was saying, whatever the great person does, that becomes pramana, that becomes evident. Loka Sadanuvartate, Loka, the world, that, Anuvartate, follows. The world follows that. So there's even there are different theories of history. If you're a historian, there are different theories of how or why history unfolds in a particular way. For example, there's the economic theory of history given by the unwitting architect of incredible genocide, Karl Marx. So there's the Marx economic theory of how world history moves, and then there's the great man theory, the great woman, that great people do things, and then that influences the way history goes. Or anyway, there are different theories like how does history move? What makes history go in a particular direction? Prabhupada was operating under the assumption of Christian statement that you have to somehow or other persuade important people. And as Prabhupada preached, he made very heavy statements. Unfortunately, in Prabhupada's movement, none of the disciples thought he was talking about them. But Prabhupada said things like, we have the mask, we have the clap. And having been there since 1969, no disciple of Prabhupada ever dreamed for a moment that I'm the mask. But that's what Prabhupada said. Prabhupada was making his observation. We have the mask and the clap. He said we have to boil the milk. There'll be less milk, but it'll be sweeter. He said we want a moon, not just many stars. So in other words, Prabhupada, I guess as diplomatically as he could do it, was saying that even though it was glorious was going on, something very important, something essential was missing. And another evidence of that is that, again, as a historian, trained in history, consider, for example, the very different ways that Prabhupada and his followers looked at the phenomenon of hippiedom, the hippie or all these counterculture people. Because Prabhupada's disciples, even though as far as they understood, it was only a limited distance. But as far as they understood, the hippie or the counterculture people, hippies, they were best customers. Because, we were also countercultural, we were also in our own way, just as freaky or more freaky than they were, the robes and everything. And so if you look at where devotees would go back in those days, they would go to hippie events, they would go to rock and roll concerts, they would go to, let's say, political protests to get to war in Vietnam. They would go to all the places where those people who were sort of the counterculture, they would congregate. Because devotees were coming from that background, and therefore, people just like Gujaratis tend to invite Gujaratis to come to Hare Krishna temple, or South Indians invite South Indians, and so on and so forth. And so in the same way, because Prabhupada making so many disciples in those counterculture areas, they were inviting other counterculture people. Now, we thought, merrily, life is but a dream. I mean, we thought it was all wonderful because we're getting people like us and they're joining. So we thought life is great. Prabhupada said we have to master the class. And then here's evidence. And then to give evidence, Prabhupada having a very different attitude toward these counterculture people. Anyway, one of the research projects I did about Islam history, there are letters to Prabhupada, and he said it many times, actually. It's something which was one of his talking points. That, for example, in a letter he wrote one time around 1968, he said that because one of the disciples was letting his hair grow out, and there was a controversy, Prabhupada said, actually, there is no injunction against having a hair, longer hair or beard. But the reason I didn't want it, not because there's a rule against it, but because I was afraid the public would think you were hippies. And when Prabhupada was asked by a reporter, are you going to go to hippies? He said, no, you're not, we're happies. So Prabhupada, even when he brought saris from India in 1967 or whatever it was, 68, he said it wasn't because he wanted all the ladies to wear sari, he just wanted them to wear something. Because that would actually cover the relevant parts of their body. And so, but there's direct quotes from Prabhupada about these things. He said to me, we were in a car in Honolulu driving to YPP for the morning Japa walk, and Prabhupada said, you don't have to wear any clothes. So, but why? But again, Prabhupada, something we very much desire, that all these hippies and counterculture people would identify with us. That was Prabhupada's fear, that the world will think that we're hippie. And that's why, so why? But if we were getting devotees in that community, and they were doing service, what's the problem? The problem was, from Prabhupada's point of view, you actually know how to study history. The problem was that Prabhupada had not given up on Plan A. For Prabhupada, his movement still needed for Plan A to be successful. And Plan A was that we attract people who have social position, who have resources, who can actually push the movement forward. And for example, if you look at Islam within the Indian diaspora community in North America, it's going very well. Why? First of all, because the devotees come with that background, they're very sincere. And secondly, because they tend to be very educated. They tend to be educated, they tend to have resources, therefore they can build this temple, they can build other temples. In other words, they have intelligence, they have economic facility, and they have the devotion to actually push forward Prabhupada's mission. if you go to all the, the major cities and look at ISKCON, let's say on the western side, it's a very different story. Now, we have a project called Christian West. So, get out your checkbooks. That's a joke. And in which we are now successfully attracting qualified people. Where's Christian West? You stand up for a second? Let me embarrass you. And to Naperville. Stand up. This Christian offer to 5 grand per year. They are the leaders of Christian West in this area. And we're all family, from the one family. And so we look forward to having a very Christian conscious loving relationship, with devotees. And you just have different, it's like a contemporary Christian temple. Someone's cooking the feast and someone's out selling books and so on. We occupy different strategic positions. We were one spiritual family, but we have different duties. So if as Prabhupada fervently desired, the whole reason he got the vote for God's sake, if we can develop, and these beautiful girls with the music, they're also Christian. Imagine what ISKCON will be if on the western side we had this quality, hundreds and thousands of educated devotees with resources, with ability. If it's interesting because in the early days, there were very, very few Indians in North America. Those days, you saw some of the Indian background, it's almost like you want to get out of town because there were so few people. And so I remember there was just literally a handful of Indian immigrants. And they, of course, would often come to our temples and they would, of course, learn Prabhupada's way of doing things from the Western devotees. Now, history moves a different way. Now, I think there's a real sense in which those of us, and Prabhupada explicitly ordered me to focus on Western briefing, and that was the great instruction he gave me. First and most important instruction, I had to be well educated, and I had to present mission concepts to other educated people. That was my mission. So if we look at the Indian, people did in background, obviously no one's Indian, you're all eternal souls, and you're all Vaishnavas. But we see a very powerful success story. Building temples, expanding congregation, just doing it very well, a very professional, devoted, successful way. And so Christian West, in a sense, is taking this lesson. We want to recreate what you have done in the Western community. And if we do that, then Prabhupada's dream will actually come true. Because Prabhupada's global strategy to save the planet was to make Christian consciousness work in America, and of course Canada, the 51st state. Joke, that's a joke. Oh my God. What an embarrassment, right? Man, it's so embarrassing. It's funny because when I went to Europe in 1968, not just a kid, I had to make my pilgrimage to Europe, get my Eurail test, and it went all from the Greek islands to the Arctic Circle. And because the Vietnam War was going on, so it was a thing among the young American college students in Europe. People said, where are you from? Oh, Canada. We would say we're from Canada. We even get little Canada flags and put it on their bucket so that people wouldn't harass us because we're Vietnam. Anyway, so that, and I think here in the Chicago area, the greater Chicago area, because you have a beautiful community here, and we have this amazing Christian West community which is growing, I think we can actually show an example to Islam everywhere of this line of cooperation, where we just have different battle stations. You know, based on, I mean, obviously Krishna has arranged for us to take birth in different families because we have different work to do. Krishna has organized us starting from our birth so that we would be able to serve him in different ways. So I think the Chicago area can be an amazing beacon, a light for Islam, how all the members of the family can cooperate together, each in their own circle, to make Islam very, very successful and fulfill Prabhupada's dream. So, thank you. So, any questions? Some the guru. Yeah.
We are very fortunate that you have much your lecture recording this song, of course. And I was wondering about Srila Prabhupada section of Bhagavatam.
Yeah, purport.
Is that valid for 10,000 years? Was it valid for only that time? Was such?
I'm going 10,000 years. I mean, smart money for 10,000 years. Because, I mean, when I read Prabhupada's purports, I mean, obviously the language is, you know, not contemporary Western English. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it's clear, and the ideas and the realizations are second. I mean, Prabhupada, no one has realization like Prabhupada. Prabhupada actually blessed me to complete his Bhagavatam. I organized a team, and basically I did all of the final translation reports for the remainder of the Bhagavatam. But I mean, you know, but when I read Prabhupada's purports, just amazing realization. They're ingenious and they're genius. They're powerful, and so in English is very you know, maybe some words we don't use as much nowadays, like part and parcel. But I mean, anyone with IQ in double digits can figure out what that means. So yeah, Prabhupada, there's no one on that level. Just in terms of the power of his preaching and his realization, he has a global vision. He can see the whole world. He can see all of humanity. He can see all the universe. And he's addressing, yeah, there's no one like Prabhupada. Absolutely unique. And so rather than being, you know, too archaic or anachronistic, but here's the Prabhupada here's the key. Prabhupada wrote me a letter when I was a young sannyasi, or let's say younger. I certainly wouldn't say that. Appearances are deceiving. So, but when I was traveling about North America, preaching colleges, Prabhupada wrote to me and said, he gave me two instructions about how to preach. One is, he said, read my books and then present them in your own language. So translation doesn't just mean, let's say, from English to French or from Bengali to German. There's cultural translation. There's cultural translation. And so when I read Prabhupada's books, I see these extremely powerful, universal principles. But I can translate that into what is, you could say, politically correct, or what is culturally understandable and acceptable. And so there's a whole cultural translation that has to take place. Another point is that the President Prabhupada said to me is that when I took sannyas at the age of 23, I know. Just looking at it, whatever. So I took some out some eating. Now it seems like, oh my God, I'm surprised to even tie my shoelaces better. But when I took it out at the age of 23, he wrote to me, and he really loved the program you're doing. You're going around all the universities and teaching. He really loved it. So he said, do not present extra consciousness as rules and regulations. He said it is the most sublime philosophy. So, for example, let's say you want to be a medical doctor. And as you know, there's so much to question. I mean, you have first you have to pre-med and undergraduate, and of course they try to weed everyone out. Too many doctors, the average salary, goes down. So they so you do pre-med, which is a struggle. Then you have to get into a medical school, which is extremely competitive. Then you got to perform these sort of unhuman austerities, as a resident and so on. Now, so there's all this suppression. So why would you tell that to somebody that doesn't want to be a doctor? If someone doesn't want to be a doctor, why in the world do they want to know about the rest of it? Hi, can I talk to you about microbiology? No, please don't. So in the same way, if someone has not been inspired to engage in the greatest journey ever known, which is the journey back to home, back to God. If you haven't persuaded someone, if you haven't inspired someone to go back to their eternal home with Krishna, why in the world they want to know about your regular principles? They're just going to go and say, thank God I didn't take that. So, and also, I mean, now the world has been very much polluted by all kinds of materialistic and physicalist theories. I also act as the academic dean for the Bhakti Institute. And so what I've done is, one of the things I've done, which is kind of relevant, is when I took over the academic dean, I explained that the Prabhupada vision and mandated was not a science institute, laboratories and test tube. What Prabhupada mandated was an institute for the philosophy of science. When Prabhupada said life comes from life, life comes from soul, from God, it can't come from matter, he was doing philosophy of science. So in the institute now, we're stressing philosophy. We have all these brilliant scientists, devotees, PhDs, who are now taking philosophy courses. And so I'm going to now another lecture. But if you know some philosophy, you can very easily defeat the nonsense of physicalism, which is simply self-contradictory. If you know philosophy, you can easily show any impartial audience who fools these people are. Just to give one very simple example, in all the historical context and so on. But there's this popular philosophy among sort of pseudo-intellectuals called physicalism, where there's nothing but matter. There's no soul, there's no God, blah, blah, blah. Now, the philosophical problem with that is that if you say that we can't, or we should not, or we cannot accept anything as objectively true unless it can be empirically verified. Well, the first problem is you cannot empirically verify that you can only accept things that are empirically verified. Because to say that everything must be empirically verified is itself a metaphysical claim, which is self-contradictory. So if there is a claim, which if it's true, it's false, then it's just nonsense. It's literally just nonsense. Anyway, so we have the Bhakti Institute, there's the website, And we got a few coupons here. I'm just kidding. So anyone with a reasonable amount of intelligence can very easily learn how to defend the world against this self-contradictory nonsense, which is being, which is being promoted as if it were a serious philosophy, which it's not. Any other question? Okay, thank you all very much. And let's do this. All right. Okay. And
But that was conversation.
I guess everyone, is there anybody coming here for some this is Sunday? We have to, but please, is your hand, please, you, and you, and you. All right, please give me hand for all of you, if you don't mind. So